Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. Today I am going to be talking a little bit about universal design as it is applied in the physical world. So, what is universal design? Well, roughly it's a set of principles that guide the design of objects, of the dissemination of information or knowledge, and access to different interfaces and systems that, when followed, will make access, or as I like to say, get from point A to point B, get from where you are now to that end goal, to accessing that object, that information, that idea, that interface, make that possible for all individuals, regardless of any kind of physical, cognitive, communication, etc. impairment that they might have. There are 4 tenets or concepts to the design of accessible technology that are satisfied when using universal design. These are commonly referred to by their acronym POUR, P-O-U-R. The first is perceivable, so that the idea that whatever this object, idea, interface, this object B that we're looking at in the future, the end goal, that needs to be perceivable to anybody who wants to access it, again, regardless of any kind of impairment they might have. Operable, so this process to get from this point A to this point B to access this object, interface, information, etc., that has to be capable of being engaged by any user, again, regardless of their ability interacting with whatever that point B object is. Everyone needs to be able to interact with that. Understandable, so in this case, getting that process from point A to point B, getting to the point where you're going to, for instance, get from the ground floor of a building to the second floor of a building, or get from the home page of a website to a specific page within the website. That process of getting from point A to point B needs to be understood by all users. How do I get from point A to point B? You have to take the elevator. You have to click on this link. That should be understandable to everyone who's going to need to get to that point B. Robust, so capable of being modified, changed over time as needed, changed to fit new ways of thinking, new abilities, new limitations and abilities over time. Satisfy those 4 concepts. There are 7 principles of universal design that are used in the world of architecture, for instance, manufacturing, creating and using internet interfaces, creating and using instructional materials, for instance. The first is equitable use, so all people should be able to access that point B, whatever that point B is. They should have equal access regardless of any limitations they might have. Flexibility in use, so how they're going to get from point A to point B, or how they're going to use whatever that point B is, that object, that idea, that interface, needs to be flexible enough so that they can go at it multiple ways. For this, I like to use an example of navigating to a specific page on a website. For instance, if there's a drop-down menu and you can select the web page from that drop-down menu, and then there was a search box and you were able to search for that page and bring it up, that offers you kind of multiple ways to get from that point A to that point B. Or alternatively, multiple ways to use the website if there are multiple options as far as how to access that information. Simple and intuitive, so we're not going to make anything more complex than it needs to be in the design of this object or this interface or this way to get from point A to point B. Perceptible information, so everyone should know how to get from that point A to that point B again, whether that would be taking an elevator to get from the ground floor to the top floor, or using this device with a different hand can also result in the same interactions that you would have if you're using it with a different hand. If you were left hand dominant and it was a tool generally thought to be used by right hand dominant people, if it was interchangeable, that should be communicated so that people know they can access it in that different way. Tolerance for error, so if you make a mistake, it shouldn't be the end of the world. For instance, if you're on a website and you were trying to find web page B, that end goal of web page B, and you clicked on web page C, it shouldn't mean that you have to go all the way back to the beginning and start all over. If you could still access that drop down or that search box, you can still get to point B without any additional hassle. Low physical effort, so you want to make it as easy as possible to get from point A to point B and to use whatever point B is again. And then size and space. In the virtual world, this might mean enough space between links, actual space on the screen between links, so that it doesn't get too clustered or we don't accidentally with our mouse click the wrong link. In physical space, it might be something like an accessible doorway that has more space and opens the doors away from you. It might be the parking spaces, handicap parking spaces you see in a parking lot that are wider so that vehicles with a wheelchair ramp can allow their drivers and passengers to exit the vehicle safely. And universal design, again, is really designed for all, so that anyone, regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, and ability, can have equal access to information, objects, ideas, etc. So what impact specifically does universal design have in our physical world? One example I like to give is elevators, because elevators are kind of an interesting story, because when they were first invented, they were very largely for accessibility concerns. They were not the highlight of architectural design. Often they were put in the back, and it was seen as kind of lazy to take the elevator if there were the option to take stairs. And you would see in these elegant like hotel buildings that the focal point was that grand staircase that led up to the higher floors of the building. That is somewhat changed over time to where this principle, this idea that was put in as far as improving accessibility, has become adopted by all, because it is something that improves the lives or makes the lives easier for everyone. And so you've seen the elevator become a focal point rather than something that's set to the side. Of course, the elevator is great for people who have physical impairments. It can still be difficult for people who have vision impairments, or people who have both vision and physical impairments, so would necessitate using an elevator, but may not be able to identify the buttons, for instance, to move to the next floor. And so in early elevators, they were generally manually operated, so that might not have actually been as much of a problem, because you'd have an elevator operator who would help navigate the elevator to the proper floor. That's kind of what they still do at like the Kansas State Capitol building. They have their old elevators there, and they have elevator operators in a certain wing that operate those elevators and make them go up and down. In modern elevators, you might see something like Braille to indicate what a floor is, but honestly, there's some instances where there's just not a perfect universal design solution that has been put in place. And in some cases, it might be that uh, the individual would have to ask for assistance from somebody, which is certainly not ideal. But sometimes the reality, when universal design has not been fully realized in the architecture of a building. Another element that has certainly had similar impact to elevators is the ramp. And of course, everybody, I know certainly I, would take a ramp if that's an option and it's not blocking the path of somebody who needs it more than I. But there's a reason why ramps are easier for individuals with physical disabilities, and there's a reason. It's the same reason why everybody benefits from using ramps, is that it takes less physical energy to move up gradually on a gradual slope than it does to increase your altitude and then increase your distance laterally over a step. It puts less pressure on your feet, on your body to travel in that way. And so really everyone benefits from the design of a ramp, but it's something, again, that's really put in place so that individuals, for instance, in a wheelchair, can easily navigate from one part of the building to another. In some instances, this has been taken to really great and beneficial heights, extremes, I guess. In this case, for instance, that idea of the grand staircase being the centerpiece of a building has really been turned on its head a bit when you have this beautiful artistic ramp and the natural lighting being primarily an accessibility feature so that individuals can get from the main floor to the top floor of this building, but also standing out in its real brilliance and the colors they've selected to make it really stand out and make this beautiful spiral effect, and something that I think a lot of people would want to use to navigate from the ground floor to the main to the second floor of the building. So again, it's something where this universal design element, this accessibility element of making access to the second floor possible for everyone, has been integrated and really taken to the level where not only is it useful for all people, but it's really become a centerpiece of the design, the architecture of this building, which is really quite excellent. Though again, you could run into some similar problems as far as being able to navigate to where the ramp is located, because it is a fairly narrow path, as you can see there. So again, it's difficult to make things perfect as far as universal design. The aim is to make them as equitable as possible and always be trying to improve. You can also see some elements of universal design in everyday objects that we use. For instance, the design of dual-handed objects. So there might be a certain brand of scissors which are traditionally designed for those who are right-hand dominant, that can be used equally well by individuals who are left-hand dominant. For instance, those types of implements are becoming more common to where they're more ambidextrous tools. That again is a principle of universal design, where individuals who are left-hand dominant for a long period of time were limited in their ability to use common everyday objects because they would have to use primarily their dominant hand. Even driving like a stick shift car would potentially be difficult. That is improved over time as universal design elements have been integrated so that individuals, regardless of their handedness, can use tools equally effectively. So I'll conclude on this statement, which I think is true, certainly, and also very important, that universal design is vital to ensuring all citizens can fully participate in a democratic society. And that's certainly true of universal design in physical objects and physical spaces, because access to different parts of a building, access to people, communicative partners who are located in a certain physical space, ability to use tools, are all basic parts of what allows us to be functional members of a society and to inform ourselves and educate ourselves and become functional members of the democratic society, as I say here. So I thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope some of these principles will be found useful to you and you'll be able to incorporate them in your own design